The shocking truth about what goes into a police file after you get arrested. Spoiler alert, it's not necessarily what you would expect. So today we're going to be going on a deep dive to exactly what goes into a police report and going through a case study where we actually look at a police report and we look at how that gets created. My name is Veronica. I'm a domestic violence defense attorney here in California, and I help people put their cases behind them so that they can enjoy their lives and their freedom. I'm also the creator of a course called Defeat the DVRO, in which I teach you from start to finish how to represent yourself at a restraining order hearing and win. If in addition to being arrested, you also got served with a restraining order, make sure you get your free first class in the course via the link down below. All right, so let's jump right in. First of all, why is a police report so important? It is important because after you get arrested, before your first court date, the prosecutor, somebody from the DA's office, an attorney, has to actually look at the file and decide what to do with the case. They could file more serious charges, less serious charges, go along with what you were arrested for, or potentially drop the case altogether, which is of course what you are hoping for. And one of the things that the prosecution is looking for here is how serious is the case, right? How bad are the allegations? How strong is the evidence? So you get arrested, the police officers write up a report, they send it on over to the prosecutor's office, and then the prosecution is looking at this police report and trying to figure out how serious this case is. Now, when reading it, the prosecution generally accepts whatever is in it that was written by a police officer as true. The prosecution and the police, they work together. They are on the same side. So generally, when a prosecutor is looking at a police report, as opposed to a defense attorney, they are going to accept everything in it as true. And generally, that's really all that they have to go on at that point. They don't necessarily have, for example, the body-worn camera to review, and they definitely don't have time or take the time for a domestic violence case to actually review that. So the police report is very important, but it is often a very flawed document. Let's look at a police report from a domestic violence case. Now, as we're going through this, I want you to really think about what are your impressions about what happened? What are your impressions about the person who was arrested? And keep those thoughts in mind, because in a minute, we're going to go through what really happened in this case, and you might be surprised by how different it is from what actually happened in the police report. And if you were arrested, look, this kind of document is being generated about your case if it hasn't been already. We can see that this is a felony incident report. Michael Johnson here is apparently the person who was arrested, and we can see two mugshots of him in black and white. First, we have a summary. Okay, so on 7/1/2024, at approximately 2100 hours, I, Officer Martinez, the writer of the report, and Officer Smith responded to a domestic disturbance call at 567 Maple Street. Contact was made with Sarah Johnson, V, and V stands for victim in these reports, and Michael Johnson, identified as S for suspect. V reports that S grabbed her arm, causing a red mark and swelling. Now we have the victim's statement. Officer Smith interviewed V. She appeared fearful and had obviously been crying. V had a visible red mark and possible swelling on her right arm. V initially stated that nothing had occurred and it was just an argument. Upon further questioning, V admitted that S grabbed her arm during a verbal altercation. V appeared hesitant to provide details. It's not a pretty picture, right? We have a woman who's crying, who's hesitant to provide details, but reluctantly says, yeah, he grabbed my arm. And that's after trying to minimize it. Now we have the suspect statement. I interviewed S. S appeared agitated and was visibly intoxicated. I observed a strong odor of alcoholic beverages from his breath. S admitted that the two had been arguing. S denied any physical altercation, stating it was just a misunderstanding and that everything's fine now. When questioned about V's arm, S claimed he didn't see any mark. All right, so we have S drunk, agitated, denying that anything happened, not being able to explain this mark on V's arm. Now let's turn to observations. Red mark and swelling observed on V's left arm, consistent with being grabbed. Photos of V's arm were taken and uploaded to evidence.com. V's reluctance to provide details and S's minimization of events are consistent with patterns observed in domestic violence cases. Disposition. All right, so disposition is where the police officer is going to recommend what should happen with the case and explains what happens with the arrest. Based on statements and observed injuries, S was arrested for a violation of PC 273.5A, corporal injury on a spouse or cohabitant. S was transported to county jail for booking. Recommend felony filing due to the nature of offense and visible injuries to V. Okay, so PC 273.5, corporal injury to a spouse or cohabitant, this is basically domestic violence with some sort of visible injury. It can be a scratch, it can be a red mark, anything like that. And generally, when you get arrested for that, it's going to be arrested as a felony. Okay, so now that we've gone through the police report, make a note of, if these are all the details that you got, what you would think about what happened here. If I weren't a defense attorney at least, I would think it's not looking that good. The suspect, Mike, he didn't really give any sort of explanation here. The fact that the victim was crying, the suspect, Mike, he's drunk, there's this visible injury, and then we have the police saying that they're recommending this for a felony filing, so not that great. Now let's go through what actually happened, though. It was a warm summer evening. Sarah and Mike were enjoying a bottle of wine out on their back porch. Unfortunately, they enjoyed the wine a little bit too much, especially Sarah. The conversation turned to a coworker of Mike's who Sarah thought was getting a little bit too friendly with him. Ultimately, they began arguing. Sarah gets mad, and in a moment of anger, she slaps Mike across the face, leaving faint scratches with her long nails. Mike grabs her arm to prevent her from slapping him again, but she's angry, she's had too much to drink, and she keeps attacking him. So ultimately, he decides that he is going to call 911. He's not trying to get her arrested. He just doesn't really know what to do in this situation. She's out of control, and he's hoping that if the cops show up, they can mediate things for the couple and calm them down before Sarah hurts him or hurts herself. So the dispatcher sends out a call. Officer Martinez and Officer Smith are nearby, so they respond. And Mike, obviously having no idea what is to come and how the rest of his night is going to go, answers the door. The officers separate Sarah and Mike for questioning, and this is normal, this is what they do. Officer Smith is the one who speaks with Sarah. He says, "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here?" And Sarah is feeling guilty. She knows she slapped Mike. She doesn't want to incriminate herself. She says it was just an argument. Nothing really happened. Officer Smith is used to this, and he tells her, "Ma'am, I can tell that you're not being entirely truthful with me. I see that there's a mark on your arm, and in situations like this, we have to arrest someone. It's the law, and I can tell that you are in an abusive situation here. You can tell me what happened." Sarah then, not wanting to get arrested herself, but not wanting the man she loves, Mike, to get arrested either, says, "Okay, no, it was me. I hit him. I was mad. It was all me." Meanwhile, in the living room, we have Officer Martinez questioning Mike. "Sir, can you explain what happened this evening?" Mike doesn't want to get Sarah in trouble, and now that the cops are here and they've separated them, he's starting to get a little bit nervous. So he downplays the incident. He says, "It was just a misunderstanding, officer. We had an argument, but everything is fine now." But Officer Martinez can see that Mike has scratches on his face. So he says, "And how did you get those marks?" Mike says, "Oh, I must have scratched myself earlier." He really just wants the police to leave at this point. And Martinez then says, "What about the mark on your wife's arm?" Mike never saw a mark, and he didn't think he left one, so he's confused. And he says, "What mark? I didn't see any mark on her arm." The officers reconvene outside and compare notes. "She's clearly protecting him," says Officer Smith. Says he grabbed her arm, but only after she hit him first. "There's definitely redness on her arm." Martinez says, yeah, he's got scratches on his face, but he says he doesn't know how he got them. And he denies seeing any mark on his wife's arm at all. It sounds like he's minimizing. So they go back inside, and Officer Smith says to Mike, "Sir, place your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for domestic violence." Both Mike and Sarah are horrified. Now, the officers are actually pretty kind to Mike, and on the way to the station, Officer Martinez tries to reassure Mike, telling him, "You know what, it's no big deal. We have to arrest somebody in this situation. The case will probably get dropped. You really have nothing to worry about." But Mike is shocked when he gets to the station and he is booked for a felony. His bail is $50,000. Sarah stays up all night but gets in contact with a bail bondsman, bails him out, and ultimately picks him up from jail. Now, after booking Mike at the station, the officers get a call about a nearby suspected gang drive-by shooting. All officers in the area need to respond, so they do that, and they have 2 more calls that evening for domestic violence situations similar to Mike and Sarah. Obviously, what actually happened was very different than that police report that you heard at the beginning. And this is very typical. I have handled hundreds, if not thousands, of these cases, and this is how it goes. But let's go through that police report and really dissect it this time. So first of all, check out the date. So this incident happened, this call happened on July 1st, but actually the police report was not written until July 3rd. Can you imagine if you are one of those officers? You were trying to do a good job, But you get all these calls, all these incidents happen, and they tend to be very similar. And the police officer may have some of his own notes, but when he has a really busy night, and especially if he doesn't write the police report until 2 days later, then even though he may be doing his best, there are going to probably be some big inaccuracies. Next, let's look at the summary. What the summary is focused on is explaining why an arrest happened. So it's generally not going to have anything in there that is going to be positive for the defendant. It's only going to have negative things. So here, it doesn't say that Sarah said that she slapped Mike first. It also says that Sarah's arm had swelling, which it doesn't necessarily have. Okay, next let's look at the victim statement. This was not actually written by the officer who interviewed Sarah. This was written by Officer Martinez, but Officer Smith is the one who interviewed Sarah. Let's think about the process here. Officer Smith gives Officer Martinez a little summary outside, as we heard. 2 days later, as part of this report that Officer Martinez is writing up, he includes what he remembers of that summary. That is how it goes. And again, as Officer Martinez is writing this, he is writing this to show we made a lawful arrest. Not we went out, we didn't really figure out what happened at all, we aren't sure what happened and we just decided to arrest someone. Of course, it's not going to say that. Now, the report also characterizes Sarah as fearful, despite her not expressing that she was fearful. And if she did appear fearful, maybe it's because cops were in her house talking about arresting either her or Mike. It also omits Sarah's admission that she hit Mike first, which is crucial. If someone is trying to slap you and continuing to attack you and you grab their arm just to stop them, that is classic self-defense. Now, you can't keep squeezing and try to hurt them, but you can certainly stop them. And by not including that here, they are making it seem like this wasn't self-defense. The report also doesn't say that Sarah was intoxicated. It talks about how Mike had this strong odor of alcoholic beverage, which is like a police catchphrase that they love to use if someone's drunk, coming from his breath, but nothing about the fact that Sarah was drunk. Next, the suspect statement. The report describes Mike as agitated and visibly intoxicated. What's coming to mind here is that Mike is drunk and angry, and he gets mad at Sarah and he decides he's going to attack her. Why? Because he's a bad guy, because he's a wife beater. That's what the entire report is implying, right? It doesn't mention the scratches on Mike's face. Now, this is also normal, and this is one of the reasons why I tell my clients to make sure to document their injuries. Now, in this observation section, to me, they're trying to puff it up a bit, which is very common too, where they say, we saw this, we heard this, and this is all consistent with domestic violence, because their goal is to justify this arrest, to say we did have probable cause, which is what they need to arrest someone. This wasn't a wrongful arrest. We had good reasons to arrest this person, and we are explaining those in this report. Okay, now let's look at the disposition section. They recommend a felony filing. Officer Martinez tells Mike, hey, don't worry about this. It's all going to be fine. The case will probably get dropped. Then he books Mike for a felony, and he recommends a felony filing. Now, let's break that down, because Officer Martinez is not necessarily trying to be a jerk here to Mike. Police officers tell a lot of people not to worry about it in this type of situation because they want the arrest to go smoothly. They want the night to go smoothly. If you tell the defendant you're screwed, you're probably going to have a felony on your record, this is really bad for you, you might go to prison, the defendant might get a little bit agitated, especially if he already appears agitated and appears drunk. And then look, if a police officer books you for a felony, they are not going to recommend that the DA's office only pursue this as a misdemeanor. It wouldn't make any sense. They are saying, all right, since I booked this person for a felony, I believe it to be a felony. Why would I recommend it to be a misdemeanor? Or I recommend the whole case being dropped. If they say that, then they are pretty much admitting that they wrongfully arrested someone. Now, the police department might even have some liability there. Now, let's talk about some more omissions from the report here in general. And this may be one that you've been waiting for me to say or wondering if I'm going to say. Mike is the one who called 911. That is not in there, and it usually is not in there. Why? The number one reason is because Officer Martinez probably did not even know. He gets told over his radio, along with Officer Smith, hey, we need you to go over to this address for this domestic violence call. They don't know all the details from the 911 call. In fact, the person on the radio may not know all the details there. So that perhaps very crucial detail may not make it to the report that Mike called 911. What he said to the 911 operator, if he said, hey, we just need some help over here, my wife is really drunk, I don't know what to do, that piece of evidence, which does exist out there, it's just not part of the report, to me, does make it seem like Mike is way less likely to be guilty. but it's not here. We also have the mugshot in black and white. Remember, Mike has a scratch to his face. Maybe that would come across, and maybe the DA, the prosecutor looking at the case, would wonder, hey, how did he get that scratch? Now, it wouldn't necessarily make a big difference because they might think, oh, that was a defensive wound, that the alleged victim slapped him or scratched him to try to get him to stop. But that's not here, because for the police department, budget cuts, what's the point of printing it out in color? And just seeing this report, if you don't know the real story, if you haven't seen Mike when he has not just been arrested for something that you really shouldn't have been arrested for, and when he is sober and happy, he probably looks a whole lot different than this black and white mugshot. This is probably all that the DA is going to see of him, and he doesn't look that great there. Potentially he looks like a criminal in that picture, as anybody really does in their mugshot. And what we also don't have here is a photograph of the alleged victim's injuries. Is there really swelling? How much redness are we talking about here? We don't know because the photographs were uploaded to evidence.com and not printed out. Now, the DA's office does have access to evidence.com, and if the case gets filed in court, after probably numerous requests from the defense attorney on the case, those photographs will surface. But when the DA is making that initial filing decision, that's going to make a huge impact on your life, and they have a big stack of these documents to go through, and they really have no incentive to look up extra evidence at that point, they are almost certainly not going to see those photographs. And sometimes they are included. Sometimes they are included in black and white, which can be completely useless, but they don't have to be. Okay, so what are the lessons here? You should expect that the police report is not going to be good for you if this is the first time that you got arrested. And that is a lot of people who get arrested for domestic violence, because it could happen to pretty much anyone, especially if you are a guy. You may have this idea that the police report is almost going to be like a transcript of everything that went down, of everything that you said, of everything that the alleged victim said, that it's going to have everything in there. Because you don't know the system yet, so you have faith in it, and you have faith in the truth setting you free and justice, and because it would make sense if it were like that, right? But it's not like that. You also have to understand that if the police arrest you, everything in the report is going to be to justify that arrest. I've had many clients who are friends with police officers, who have police officers in their family, who have faith in police officers, and who know that they did nothing wrong. But look, if the police officer books you for felony domestic violence and they make a recommendation, it is going to be to prosecute you for felony domestic violence, not to do something else. So if a case gets filed, one of the first things I do as a defense attorney is request the body-worn video, because that will show me what actually happened. And then usually the DA in the case doesn't watch it, and they're not going to watch it unless the case is set for trial. So I also get a transcript of it. I highlight important things for the DA so that they can see problems that they have with the case. Because when attorneys, defense and prosecution, when we are thinking about how strong is this case, what we are all thinking about is what can be proven at trial. Now, the police report is not going to come in at trial. Instead, it is going to be about witness testimony, perhaps some body-worn video. It's going to be about what actually happened. And so in a case like this, especially if I have a DA who's very overwhelmed, I need to point out to them, here's what was actually said. So if charges do get filed, your attorney needs to get that body-worn video as soon as possible to show what actually went down during this investigation and not just rely on the police report. And finally, and maybe most importantly, if you get arrested, you do not want the DA only making their decision as to whether to file a felony against you versus perhaps drop the case altogether. You don't want them to base that just on the police report. And so it is really important that you hire an attorney. It doesn't have to be me. This is not a late night infomercial, but it's really important that you hire an attorney who is going to contact the DA and make sure that in that file, when they are looking at the police report, there's also your side of the story. Good things about you, hardships you've experienced. If you are still with the victim, a letter from you. It doesn't have to be about exactly what happened, because again, until they get the body-worn video, they're going to rely somewhat on that report. Character letters, all of the good things about you, your background information. This shows the DA, first of all, that you have an attorney, so you're going to fight this, but also shows them that, hey, maybe you are someone deserving of a second chance here. A lot of people get arrested for domestic violence. They're not going to prosecute every single one. And so you want to tip the scales in your favor to get those charges dropped before court. I hope you found this video helpful. And if you do have a criminal case in California, feel free to give me a call. You can find my number down below. You can also find a link to book a consultation there. This is part one of a whole series where I'm going to do a deep dive on exactly what happens in a domestic violence case so that you know what to expect. Make sure that you look for that. And if you did find it helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.